everyone, my name is Ian. I work at the Panther Lab Makerspace at the Fort Worth Public Library, and today I'm going to be teaching the Sewing Machine 101 class. This class is intended if you maybe have a sewing machine that was handed down to you from a relative or a friend and don't know what to do or how to get started. Sewing machines can be very complicated, but I promise after watching this video it should help make the process easier. Whether you have a very complicated machine or a simple and basic machine, either one will work just fine, and this video will help you get on the road to using that machine. Now, one thing I highly recommend is making sure to read your user manual. Your machine comes with a user manual and it talks about just your machine. Today I'm going to be working in generals and non-specifics since there are so many different types of machines out on the market right now. So make sure to look at that user manual because it's going to relate exactly to your machine and tell you exactly how to use it. If your machine didn't come with a user manual, check online. A lot of the user manuals are now online. Now, as we go through the class today, you may want to have some supplies on hand ready to go because you may want to practice what we're talking about. Feel free to pause the video and actually implement what we're talking about. So first of all, you may want to have your machine ready to go. Second of all, you may want to have some thread and some fabric ready. It doesn't have to be anything special, just something to practice with. Guys, after the class is over with, I highly recommend checking out more resources either online or in the library's collection about your specific machine or just sewing in general. Please feel free to check all those resources out. Alright guys, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start off taking a look at the bobbin case, and how to wind a bobbin. Alright, let's go ahead and start working with our bobbin. This is the bobbin that my specific machine takes. Your machine may be different, so make sure to find out which bobbin works in your machine. I'm going to take my spool of thread. I'm going to go ahead and put it on the spool thread holder. I have a plate with mine that holds that spool of thread on so that way it doesn't go flying off as I'm sewing. On the back here I have a little hook. I'm going to hook my thread through that. Your machine may or may not have that hook. Just make sure to refer to that manual. And then I have some arrows up here at the top that tell me to take the thread and loop it around once through this little notch. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my thread, I'm going to wind it around my bobbin a couple of times. And now I'm going to put it on the spool winder. Alright, just to recap, for my specific machine, and probably yours has something very similar, you're going to go from the spool around some sort of hook or peg, and then over to your spool winder, and then you flip the switch and it'll start winding. Now my machine has this nice little switch right here next to my bobbin. Not all of them have that. Sometimes you have to use the foot pedal in order to engage the bobbin winder. You can do that either on the hand crank. There may be a button or something that you have to push to activate it, or sometimes you just slide it over into place and then use your foot pedal to power it. Once I have my bobbin wound, I'm going to go ahead and cut my thread. On my machine, I have a thread cutter back here on the back side of the switch. You may have to use your scissors. And some machines use a bobbin case, just like this one. This is the one that I use for this machine in particular. So I'm going to take my bobbin and place it into the bobbin holder. And then there are a little indentation. It's going to be hard to see, so I'm going to let the camera focus here. There's a little indentation. There's a little indentation where my thread falls into. And once it falls into that spot, I'm going to just gently pull it so that it lines up behind these metal pieces and clicks into place. Just like that. Now, in order to get my bobbin into my machine, I have to use the bobbin case. I'm going to go ahead and put my bobbin into the bobbin case. And my little thread, there's a little indentation over on this side. It may be hard to pick up on camera. I'm going to try and focus on it so that way you can see. My thread will just fall into that little indentation right there. Does everybody see that? It just falls right into that indentation, and it actually goes behind this metal plate and then behind this metal hoop and just clicks into place just like that. Your machine is going to be different, so make sure to consult the user manual. I'm going to be saying that a lot today, but check your user manual if you use a bobbin case like this one. Now that I have my bobbin case wound and ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and put it into my machine. There's a little flap here underneath the plate that opens up, and I can put it into its place, and it's just going to click right into place. Just like that. And now I'm going to close the front door, and now I have my bobbin ready to go. This is the bobbin that I have for this Singer machine. What I'm going to do is, it's already wound, I'm not going to wind this one, but what I would do is I would take my thread, I would loop it through the hook that you see right here, then it goes around our pin, and then it would go onto the bobbin. Now the bobbin for this one, you have to engage by first of all moving it over into place. Do you see how this shifts back and forth? I would put it into place, shift it over, and over on the end here, let me see if I can show you this. On the end, on our hand crank, there's a little button that you push and it pops it out, and you use the foot pedal to actually wind the bobbin. Whenever you're done winding the bobbin, you'll go ahead and disengage the bobbin winder and then push this button back down again so that way it's a flat surface. Now that I have my bobbin ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and move the plate forward so that way it opens up to reveal the bobbin area. I'm going to go ahead and drop it in. The bobbin has the thread coming off to the left. I'm going to drop it in, and there's a little groove. It's hard to see on camera. I would have to get a super close-up lens for this, but there's a little spot where that thread drops into and then comes back around. It's like a little hook, basically, where that thread catches. And you'll know if you've caught it or not. You'll kind of feel it engage, and then it drops into that little groove, and then you close this back and it's ready to sew. Alright, I have my bobbin wound. It's time to put it into the machine. I'm going to move this plate back to reveal the place where the bobbin goes. I place it into that little spot, and there's a groove here. It's going to be really hard to see. I don't know if you're even going to be able to see this on camera, but there's a little groove where the thread pops into, and you'll feel it kind of hook. And then you bring it around, and then there's another little area, an indentation that thread falls into, and you pull it just like this, and it's now engaged. So you can close this back, and it's ready to get started with. Alright, now that we have learned how to wind the bobbin and put it into our machine, let's go ahead and learn how to thread our machine. It's now time to go ahead and thread our main machine. What I'm going to do for this machine is it goes through this little peg at the top. You just drop it through the top. You probably heard that click. I'll do it again just to make sure. But there's a little click when you get the thread through. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take your thread down through this. There's an arrow up here that indicates, it's hard to see on camera, but in person you'll see this little arrow. You drop it down through, loop it around, bring it back up, and another arrow over here indicates that you're going to take the thread back around there and down. Once you get it dropped down through the front here, you're able to put it through the eye of the needle, so that way you're ready to start sewing. For my Bernina machine, I'm going to take, you can kind of see it off camera here, I have the thread up here. I'm going to take it across the back of the machine, hook it back through the hook that I did for whenever I was winding the bobbin. I'm going to take it down and around this plate, back up. Again, I have arrows indicating which way my thread needs to go. I'm going to put it all the way to the back of this little channel and then bring it back forward. Whenever I do that, it automatically catches inside of here where it needs to go. So I'm going to put it through there. I'm going to keep going down. I have a couple more spots. There's even arrows here to tell me where I need to go with this thread. So I'm going to bring my thread down this channel. It's going to go just behind this metal piece right here. And there's another metal piece way back here that I have to get it hooked through back there. Once I have my thread going through those sections, I'm going to use my automatic needle threader, and I'm going to go ahead and put it through the eye of the needle just like that. Not all machines have the automatic threader, but I definitely love using the one on my machine. Next up, we're going to learn how to change the needle on our machine. You'd be surprised at how frequently you need to change your needle, so I'm going to show you how to do that right now. To change the needle on my machine, I have to use a special tool to loosen this, and then I'm able to just grab the needle and gently pull down. And the needle has a flat side, as you can see here, so whenever putting your new needle back in, just remember that there will be a little spot that it fits into like a puzzle piece. Once you have your new needle in, just make sure to tighten this back up. Again, I have to use my special tool in order to tighten this all back up, but just remember to do that so that way your needle doesn't fall out while you're sewing. There are many different types of needles out there for different types of situations. For just general sewing, you want a generic needle. Let's learn about the different types of needle available. Now, I didn't realize that there were different types of needles when I started sewing, but it can be kind of important. For instance, if you're sewing light fabrics such as silk and taffeta, you're going to use a needle that's typically going to be 970. For medium weight fabrics such as cotton and linen, you'll use a needle about 1180. For your more heavier fabrics, or an ideal in-between, you would use a 1490. And then lastly, for your denims, tweed, heavy upholstery fabric, you're going to use a needle that is 60-100. These needles that I'm holding in my hand are kind of the middle road ones. They're going to be the 70-10s or the 80-12s. But you'll just need a recommendation from your sewing store if you're not comfortable. They'll be able to help point you in the right direction. Next up, let's take a closer look at presser feet and see what they do. This right here is a presser foot. This is what pushes your material up against these teeth down here, which are the feed dogs. And my presser foot goes up and down using a button. Now your machine may be a little different. It might have a lever here on the back side that you push up or down. It could have one over on this side in this little archway as well. So look at your machine and find that lever that will lift and lower your presser foot. So as you start to sew, this presser foot jumps up a little bit, just enough so that way the material can move a little more forward as the feed dogs pull it through, and then it'll lower again whenever the needle comes back down. Next up, it's important to service your machine at home. You can do this very easily, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Now, it's important to remember to keep your machine clean. A lot of the areas that the fibers collect in are areas that we don't typically see unless we remove our stitch plate here. So in order to remove your stitch plate here on this machine, there's a little target back here in the back. I'm going to gently press in that back area until it pops up, and then I'm going to gently grab it and take it off. Now, normally the manual tells you you're supposed to remove both the presser foot and the needle when you're doing that, but I can almost guarantee you not everybody does that. I'm definitely guilty of leaving them on whenever I do that. But inside this area, you can see that there is going to be a lot of fibers that collect in here. So you'll want to use like a pipe cleaner or some sort of soft grabbing tool to pull out some of the material. Never, never, never use your finger and dig in here. Always remember to use a tool that is soft so that way you collect the fibers but don't end up damaging your machine. To put your stitch plate back on, I'm going to gently put it back into place, pressing here over on the left and then snapping it in. Just like that. My Singer machine works a little differently. I'm going to go ahead and open up this compartment, and then I'm going to gently pull up on this plate. Do you see how it kind of fits on that little peg right there? I'm going to gently lift up that plate and swing it out. Just like that. So then I can access all this back area and clean it out. As you can see, this machine has not been cleaned lately. I need to get on that. But I have access now into this area and can clean it out with that pipe cleaner. To put this plate back in, all I'm going to do is gently fit it underneath the presser foot, and it locks in that groove right there. So I'm going to gently push and pop it right back into place, and I can close it back up again. Along the lines of getting your machine serviced, make sure to take your machine in about once a year to get professionally cleaned and oiled so that way it works perfectly and you don't end up damaging your machine. Alright, now that we've gotten our machines all set up and ready to go, let's go ahead and start learning how to sew. The first thing that we're going to be learning about is stitches. We're going to start off on our Singer machine here, and we have our list of stitches already printed on the machine. Sometimes they're going to be printed on the machine, other times you may have to go through the user manual in order to find the stitches. But say for instance I wanted to go from just a regular straight stitch to a zigzag stitch. I would use my knob here and click onto the corresponding number. So this is going to be 6. I'm going to rotate the dial to 6. Now if I was going to start sewing, it would give me a straight line, because you see over here, this is how deep of a zigzag stitch do I want. So do I want just a straight stitch, or do I want a full-on zigzag stitch? So depending on what you're doing, you may want to move this over, and it's going to move your needle too, so that way when you start sewing, it will give you the zigzag stitch. If you didn't want a zigzag stitch and wanted it back on your just straight stitch, you would move that back over into its place and then switch this back to 5. Just always remember whenever you're done doing a decorative or zigzag stitch to return it back to a straight stitch. Just reset those back to where they belong. I always forget to do that and kick myself whenever it happens. Another important thing to keep in mind is your stitch length. If I have it set down to 0, the needle's gonna jump up and down in the same place on my fabric, and the feed dogs are not gonna pull my material through. Now if I want a longer stitch, I'll just move this lever up and keep moving to the indicated area where I want it to be. Most of the time I keep it around 2, 2.5, something of that nature, but it's really your personal preference, and sometimes patterns call for different stitch lengths. Whenever you do start sewing and using these stitches, you are going to use your pedal to determine how fast you're going. So the harder you press, the faster you go. It's very similar to how a car works. Just think about it. When you let your foot off the gas, the car will come to a stop, but the harder you press down on that gas pedal, the faster the car goes. Now this Bernina is a little fancier. It does have a computer touchscreen in it, so that allows me to pick the stitch that I want, and the computer inside handles all the rest of it for me. So if I wanted a zigzag stitch, all I have to do is just touch it here on the screen and it automatically sets that stitch up here in the display. If I wanted to make it a deeper zigzag, I would just rotate this knob right here to make it a big back and forth zigzag stitch. Or if I wanted to make my stitches longer or shorter, I would just rotate this knob and it's going to make my zigzag either longer or shorter. To set everything back the way I had it, I can just click clear and then click back onto my original straight stitch. This one has a lot of different stitches on it. In fact, it has so many stitches, it doesn't even have the availability to put them all on the machine itself. I have to refer back to the manual to see what stitches I have on board. But you don't need any fancy stitches, just a single straight stitch will get you what you need. Another important stitch to talk about is back stitching. That is important for locking your stitches into place whenever you start a stitch line and whenever you finish a stitch. To do that on this machine, there is just a simple button that reverses the fabric. Basically, back stitching, as you're sewing forward, back stitching will actually push the fabric in the opposite direction. So you want to go back 2 or 3 stitches just to lock those into place and make sure that they don't come out through wear and tear. And then once you release the button, it will automatically start pushing the material back through the machine the regular way again. But just remember to back stitch at the beginning and the end of each stitch. On the Singer machine here, to back stitch, I have this little lever and I would push this into the machine to activate the back stitch. So as the material is pushing forward, I would push this, it'll push the fabric back a couple of stitches, and then when I'm ready to start moving forward again, I would release it and it'll start pulling the fabric back through like it normally would. Now that we've learned about the different types of stitches and stitch lengths and all of that kind of stuff, let's go ahead and move to seam allowance. As you can see here on this stitch plate, there are different lines that represent the different seam allowances. A lot of times you're going to be using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance whenever you're sewing a pattern or quilting or anything like that. And that's usually on the edge of the presser foot here. So usually, I can't show that very well, but usually on this side right here, that's a 1/4 inch right there. These other lines moving out are going to be larger and larger increments, and you can use a ruler to figure out which one is which. But a lot of times I do see stitch plates that are marked. As you can see here on my Bernina machine, I do have a lot of seam allowances listed on these different guides. The 5/8 seam allowance is going to be this line right here. And typically whenever I'm sewing, I use the 1/4 inch, which is kind of hidden right here, but I have a larger presser foot on this machine. So this is about a 1/4 inch seam and the line that I would follow whenever doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, of course, your machine may vary, so take a look at your stitch plate and find the 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and all the different recommended seam allowances that you might be using for your patterns. Alright guys, it's now time to start sewing. We've gotten the basics out of the way, so let's go ahead and just do a simple straight stitch, nothing too special. Remember to put your presser foot down, and I'm going to gently push on my pedal to get the needle going and get the material moving through. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to push the back button or the reverse stitch, so that way it puts a couple of back stitches into it. I'm going to keep moving forward, and the faster I push on that pedal, the faster this is going to go. I'm going to slow down because remember I'm ready to back stitch at the end here, so I'm going to go ahead and push the back stitch button. It's going to take a couple of stitches backwards. I'm going to release that button. It moves it back forward again. And mine has an automatic thread cutter, But if you didn't have that, you can just rotate your hand crank, lift your presser foot, and then you can simply pull the material out and give it a cut. Okay, so now we're going to put our seam allowances into practice. I have two pieces of material here that are rounded. I have a rounded side because I want to make a curve with this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up right up against my 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to go ahead and put my presser foot down. And basically, whenever you're sewing on a seam, you want to keep it pushed up against that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So as you push the material through, gently guide it through the machine. You're going to gently guide it up against that 1/4 inch seam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my sewing. I am going to backstitch. And now that I've backstitched, I can go ahead and start sewing along that curve. Just take it slow, take it easy. Now, if your material bunches up like it was trying to do, you can lift up the presser foot and just kind of wiggle the material a little bit. There, I did a little bit of back stitching to get it locked into place, and now I'm going to cut my threads. So now you can see here I have my curve, and this is great for turning two-dimensional materials into basically a three-dimensional design. So I might have that be a shoulder for a garment that I'm sewing on or something like that. But now you have it's not perfect. I'm not perfect whenever it comes to this, but all right, remember guys, this is just for demo. It's not going to be 100% perfect, but basically we can now get ourselves like a little shoulder if you're sewing on a shirt or a garment or something like that. It basically turns those two-dimensional pieces into three-dimensional pieces now that I can use for a garment or something like that. And remember, if I'm doing just a straight stitch, I line it up against my 1/4 inch seam allowance and then put my presser foot down and just start sewing and just keep it up against that 1/4 inch. Okay, let's say it is time to take this corner that you see right here. I'm going to go ahead and walk myself close to that corner. And once I think I'm about a 1/4 inch away from the edge, I'm going to stop. My presser foot automatically comes up, but you'll probably have to lift your presser foot up. You're going to rotate the materials so that you're going in the direction that you're hoping to go next. You'll put your presser foot back down again, and then you'll start sewing in that straight line. So as you can see, I've taken my corner, I've gone from one corner and then, so as you can see here, I've taken my corner. It's about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This material isn't even, but I have about a 1/4 inch seam allowance as I took that corner. Remember guys, this does take practice, so don't get frustrated if you don't get it the first time. Lastly, let's talk about our cutting tools, whether that be a cutting mat, a rotary cutter, regular scissors, or a ruler that you use. Let's go ahead and break those down right now. Remember, as we talk about cutting tools, a lot of it is personal preference and what you feel most comfortable with. Use the tool that you feel works the best for you and feels the best as you're using it. So first of all, we have the just regular fabric scissors. Remember, don't use your fabric scissors on paper or any other material that can make your blade dull faster. So this is my dedicated fabric scissors. We also have two different types of rotary cutters. These have a blade on them, and you can rotate that blade while running it along a cutting mat. Don't use a rotary cutter without a mat underneath it, because it will will damage the material you use underneath it. So like I said, this one has a cover on it. In fact, both of these have covers on them. For the cover to be removed, you just simply slide it back like that, and then I would put it onto my cutting mat, run it across the material that I want to cut, put the safety guard back in place, and that way it's nice and safe. Same thing with this one. This one has a removable guard that switches down just like that. I would use it to cut my material and then put the safety guard back in place so that way it is safe. You also have your smaller scissors. So scissors come in all different shapes and sizes, as I'm sure you're well aware of. These are smaller scissors, and these are perfect for cutting threads. So as I am sewing, there are going to be little threads that are generated either at the beginning of the stitch, at the end of the stitch, or even some of the fabric may come unraveled a little bit. So I would use these little scissors to kind of get into those spaces and trim off those little bits of thread. Same thing with this pair down here at the end. This is for trimming off those little threads that are just kind of hanging off, which is really important because you don't want your material unraveling. So make sure to trim off any of those loose threads. Also guys, remember cutting mats have two sides to them. They have a dark side and a light side, so that way you can contrast the material that you're working with, so that way it's easier to see and you get better cuts. These are my favorite scissors because they are very sharp and they make a really good noise. Other tools you might use whenever you are cutting out fabric is some sort of marking utensil. I have a water-soluble pen here with the blue cap, and then this one down here at the bottom. It is a pen that reacts to heat. So whenever it is heated up, the ink actually disappears. It's kind of like disappearing ink. This one is my favorite to work with whenever I am marking fabric because I just run the iron over it and that mark just disappears as if it was never there. It is intended for paper. This is a Pilot friction pen. So it's intended for paper, an erasable pen for paper, but a lot of times I save it just for fabrics because it's so easy to use. Like I said, you also have the water-soluble pens, so these can be used to mark off your fabric where you're ready to cut or any notation that you need to make, and then you can then wash it out with just plain water and throw it into the washing machine if the garment or fabric is able to be machine washed, and then you can use that to make the ink just disappear. So this is a great pen for if you want something that you need to iron in order to get those markings set, but it will wash out in the water of the washing machine. And then of course you have your heat sensitive one. These are great tools and great ways to mark up your material. Other examples that I don't have in front of me would be chalk. Chalk is another great one because it is water soluble and can wash out very easily. So you could use chalk. There are also special pencils that you can use for fabrics to mark on fabric. Remember guys, whenever you're working with any type of material, make sure to iron it first. That gets all the wrinkles out, and if you don't iron it, you can have wrinkles which will cause your fabric to be longer or misshapen, which you don't want whenever you're trying to make very precise corners or other parts of sewing. So be very careful and make sure that your material is flat. You can use a regular iron for large areas. And then if you're doing small areas, I would use a smaller iron, just like this one. This one doesn't have any steam to it. It is only for heat, and this one works really great to get in those corners and small spaces. But for the most part, you should get away just fine using a regular iron, especially if it has a pointed tip like mine does. It really gets in there and allows you to iron things out. This one does have steam, so you are able to really press in those creases or press in those seams that you're working with. Another tool that I use quite frequently is this pressing mat. It makes it really easy because I can set this in my workspace and not have to drag out the full ironing board in order to iron the areas that I need to work on. But if I need a larger garment or a larger space, I would pull out my ironing board to flatten everything out. But this one's great and it transports very easily. I hope this class has been useful and you've gotten a lot of information out of it. I know getting a sewing machine for the first time can be quite daunting, but hopefully this class gets you prepared and you are more ready to tackle your first project on your machine. As always, if you have more questions or need more resources, the Fort Worth Public Library is here for you. We have plenty of books in our collection, both in real life and on the Libby app. And of course, you can always check out the craft resource on the Fort Worth Public Library's website. Thank you so much for joining me for today's Sewing Machine 101 class, and I can't wait to see what you make.